The massive space station hung in the void like a silver flower. Nexus Prime was the biggest diplomatic station in known space. Ships from 100 different worlds docked at its arms every day. Today was special. Today, the war might finally end. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of her transport ship. She watched the station grow larger as they approached. At 28, she was the youngest fleet commander in human history. The media called her a hero. The military called her a genius. Her enemies called her something else entirely. "Commander, we're ready to dock," said Lieutenant Torres from behind her. Sarah nodded but didn't turn around. She was thinking about the weight on her shoulders. Not just the powered armor she wore, but the weight of 7 years of war. 7 years of death and sacrifice. 7 years of impossible victories. The docking clamps engaged with a soft thud. Sarah finally turned from the viewport. Her armor was battle-worn and scarred. Each dent and scratch told a story. Her crew respected those marks. They knew what each one meant. "Remember," Sarah said to her small escort team, "we're here to make peace. Keep your weapons lowered. Follow all station protocols. We want to show them we're serious about ending this war." The airlock cycled open. Sarah stepped onto Nexus Prime for the first time. The station's main corridor was huge. Aliens from dozens of species walked past. Some were tall and thin like the blue-skinned Delphani. Others were short and covered in crystal growths like the Vorthan. A few looked almost human except for their silver eyes and pointed ears. Station security waited for them. The Korath ran security on Nexus Prime. They were neutral in the war. That's why both sides trusted them to host the peace talks. The lead security officer was old for a Korath. His green skin had faded to pale yellow with age. His 4 eyes studied Sarah carefully. "Commander Chen," he said in accented standard. "I am Security Chief Thokvar. Welcome to Nexus Prime. You must follow our protocols before entering the diplomatic sector." Sarah nodded. She had expected this. "Of course, Chief. What do you need?" "All weapons must be surrendered. All armor must be removed. All augmentations must be declared and sealed. These rules apply to everyone. No exceptions." A crowd was gathering. Word had spread that the famous human commander was on the station. Aliens pointed and whispered. Some took pictures with their communication devices. Sarah ignored them. She had learned long ago to focus on the mission. "I understand," Sarah said. "Where do I remove my armor?" Thokvar pointed to a large security checkpoint. It was in the middle of the main corridor. Glass walls surrounded it so everyone could see inside. Sarah realized this was intentional. The Korath wanted everyone to see that their security was fair. No hidden weapons, no secret advantages. Sarah walked into the checkpoint. Her escort team stayed outside. Dozens of aliens pressed against the glass walls to watch. Some had never seen human military armor before. Others had only heard stories about the Terran Coalition's most famous warrior. The armor removal station looked like a medical scanner. Sarah stepped into the center and spread her arms. Mechanical arms extended from the walls. They began removing her armor piece by piece. First the shoulder guards, then the chest plate. Each piece was heavy with weapons and life support systems. As more armor came off, Sarah's body became visible beneath. She wore a simple black bodysuit underneath. It was designed to work with the armor's systems. But it didn't hide much. As the last pieces of armor were removed, gasps echoed through the crowd. Sarah's arms were covered in scars. Burn marks from plasma weapons ran down her left arm. Surgical scars crossed her shoulders where battlefield doctors had worked to save her life. On her right forearm, geometric patterns marked where Zephyrian neural disruptors had tried to break her mind. Her legs showed more damage. Shrapnel scars dotted her thighs. A long burn mark wrapped around her left calf where a fusion reactor had exploded too close to her position. Each mark told a story of pain and survival. But it was her back that made the crowd go silent. As Sarah turned to collect her personal items, They saw the worst of it. Crisscrossing burn marks covered her spine. These weren't random battle wounds. They formed a pattern that any military officer would recognize. Someone had tortured her. Chief Thokvar stared at Sarah's scars with growing recognition. He was old enough to remember stories from the early war. His eyes widened as he connected the marks to the battles he had heard about. The impossible victories. The legendary commander who turned defeat into victory again and again. By the ancient stars, he whispered in his native language. Then, louder, in Standard, Worldbreaker. The word spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Worldbreaker, they repeated. Some aliens stepped back from the glass. Others pressed closer, staring in awe and fear. Sarah had heard the name before. She knew what the galaxy called her. She never liked it. Sarah finished collecting her belongings. The security scan was complete. No hidden weapons, no illegal augmentations, just a young human woman covered in the proof of her impossible career. She pulled on a simple diplomatic jacket over her bodysuit. It covered most of the scars, but not all of them. Your armor will be returned when you leave the station, Thokvar said. His voice held new respect. The diplomatic sector is through those doors. The Terran delegation is waiting for you. Sarah nodded and walked toward the diplomatic sector. The crowd parted as she moved through them. Conversations followed in her wake. Aliens called friends and family to tell them they had seen the Worldbreaker in person. News feeds picked up the story. Within hours, the galaxy would know that humanity's most feared warrior had come to make peace. As Sarah reached the diplomatic sector, a young Zephyrian stepped into her path. The enemy species looked almost human, except for their pale gray skin and silver hair. This one was small and nervous, probably a low-level diplomatic aide. Commander Chen, the Zephyrian said in perfect Standard. I am Observer Kethri. I wanted to say, we know what those scars cost you. My people respect sacrifice, even from an enemy. Sarah stopped and studied the young alien. In the early days of the war, no Zephyrian would have spoken to her directly. They feared humans too much. Now here was one offering respect. Maybe there was hope for peace after all. Thank you, Observer, Sarah said. I hope we can build something better than what we've had. Kethri nodded quickly and stepped aside. Sarah continued into the diplomatic sector. Behind her, the crowd still buzzed with excitement. They had come to see a monster. Instead, they had seen something else entirely. A warrior who had paid for every victory with her own blood. A human who carried the weight of war in her scars. The peace talks were about to begin. Sarah carried no weapons now. She wore no armor, but she brought something more powerful than any military technology. She brought the living proof of what this war had cost. Every scar was a reminder of why it had to end. The galaxy called her Worldbreaker. Today she hoped to break the cycle of war itself. The diplomatic conference room was massive. Representatives from 50 different species sat around a circular table. Sarah took her place with the Terran delegation. Across from her sat the Zephyrian team. Their leader was High Admiral Veltar, an old warrior with silver scars across his pale face. As the formal speeches began, Sarah's mind drifted. She touched the burn mark on her left arm without thinking. The geometric pattern was still tender after all these years. It brought back memories she tried to keep buried. She was 16 again. Not a commander, just junior engineer Chen working in the engine room of the mining station on Kepler 442. The Zephyrians had come without warning. 3 dreadnoughts against a civilian station with no weapons. 2 million colonists had nowhere to run. The station's defenses lasted 12 minutes. Sarah watched the shield generators explode through the engine room viewports. The main reactor was overloading. Everyone was preparing to evacuate. But evacuation meant leaving the colonists to die. Sarah looked at the industrial mining laser in the asteroid processing bay. It was designed to cut rock, not fight warships, but Zephyrian shields were calibrated for military weapons. They might not stop a mining beam. She had run through the station's corridors as Zephyrian troops landed. The mining laser controls were in the processing center. Sarah reached them just as enemy soldiers blasted through the doors. She activated the laser as plasma bolts burned past her head. The mining beam punched through the lead dreadnought's shields like they were made of paper. It carved a hole straight through the ship's core. The Zephyrians had never seen anything like it. They retreated in confusion, giving the colonists time to escape. Sarah got her first scars that day. Plasma burns on her arm and shoulder. The patterns they left behind looked like strange writing. Later, she learned they were neural disruptor marks. The Zephyrians had tried to break her mind when they captured her. It didn't work. Commander Chen? Sarah blinked back to the present. Ambassador Martinez was looking at her with concern. The Delphani delegation has asked about the Battle of the Crimson Nebula. Would you care to respond? Sarah looked across the table. The Delphani representative was Seer Flowing Tide, an ancient being who spoke in whispers. Her blue skin shimmered, with patterns that showed her emotions. Right now, those patterns showed curiosity and fear. The battle was 3 years ago, Sarah said simply. We were outnumbered 20-1. The Zephyrians had us trapped in the nebula. No escape routes. No reinforcements coming. High Admiral Veltar leaned forward. His silver eyes studied Sarah's face. You turned certain defeat into our worst loss of the war. How? Sarah touched another scar, this one on her neck. A thin line where shrapnel had nearly killed her. Humans don't like being trapped. We get creative. The memory came flooding back. The Crimson Nebula was a graveyard of old ships. Hundreds of wrecks from ancient wars drifted in the dense gas clouds. The Zephyrian fleet had cornered Sarah's small task force there. They thought it was over. Sarah had studied the wrecks on her sensors. Most were too old to fight, but some still had power cores, still had weapons. The nebula's gas clouds would hide her ships if she moved carefully. She had taken her Marines on boarding raids, not to capture Zephyrian ships, but to reach the ancient wrecks. Her people worked frantically to restore power to ghost ships that had been dead for centuries. When the Zephyrians moved in for the kill, 20 ancient warships came to life around them. Sarah had turned a graveyard into an army. The enemy fleet broke apart in panic. They had never faced an enemy that could raise the dead. You used our fear against us, Veltar said quietly. Zephyrians honor the dead. When your ghost ships opened fire, my captains thought they were seeing spirits of ancient warriors. Sarah nodded. Fear is a weapon, but so is hope. My people needed to believe we could win. The crystalline Vorthon delegate spoke up. Their voice sounded like musical chimes. What about the Battle of Shard's End? You used our own technology to defeat the Zephyrian blockade. Another scar. This one on Sarah's palm, where Vorthan crystal tech had bonded with her skin. She had been 24 then. A captain commanding her first heavy cruiser. The Zephyrians had blockaded the Vorthan, homeworld, cutting off food supplies to billions of crystal beings. The Vorthon had a unique technology. Their ships could link together, sharing power and weapons through crystal connections. But they were pacifists. They didn't know how to fight. Sarah had convinced them to let her ships link with theirs. Human aggression combined with Vorthon technology. The linked fleet moved like one massive organism. The Zephyrian blockade couldn't target individual ships because they were all connected. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Zephyrian fleet was scattered and the Vorthon homeworld was free. But the crystal connection had left permanent marks on Sarah's skin. Silver lines that pulsed with faint light when she was stressed. You turned our greatest strength into a weapon, the Vorthon said. We had never imagined such applications for our linking technology. Every species has gifts, Sarah replied. Humans are good at finding new ways to use them. The insectoid Threx representative clicked their mandibles nervously. They were the newest members of the galactic community. The war had reached their space only recently. The stories say you held Firebase Omega alone for 6 days, the Threx said. My people don't understand how one human could fight an entire army. Sarah's hand moved to her shoulder. The scars there were different, deeper. They came from carrying wounded soldiers to safety, from standing in burning doorways while her people escaped, from 6 days of hell that she barely survived. Firebase Omega was supposed to be a routine supply depot. When the Zephyrians attacked, most of the garrison evacuated successfully. But someone had to hold the base long enough for the supplies to be destroyed. Someone had to make sure the enemy couldn't use the ammunition and equipment. Sarah volunteered to stay behind with a squad of volunteers. 12 people against an army. The base had automated defenses, but they wouldn't last long. When they failed, it would be up to human stubbornness to buy time. The Zephyrians came in waves. Sarah's squad fought from the bunkers, then from the supply tunnels, then from the ruins of the command center. One by one, her people fell. By the 4th day, Sarah was alone. She rigged traps from medical supplies. She turned maintenance tunnels into kill zones. She used psychological warfare, speaking to the enemy over their own communication channels. The Zephyrians began to fear the empty base was haunted. On the 6th day, a Terran relief force arrived. They found Sarah unconscious in the ruins, her body broken, but her mission complete. The base was destroyed. The supplies were gone. The Zephyrians had gained nothing but casualties. I wasn't alone, Sarah said quietly. The dead fought with me. Every trap I set, every shot I fired, I was carrying my fallen squad mates with me. The room fell silent. Representatives from dozens of species stared at this young human woman. Her scars told stories that sounded like myths. Impossible victories against overwhelming odds, but the proof was written on her skin. High Admiral Veltar broke the silence. We called you She Who Breaks Worlds. We thought it meant you destroyed planets. Now I understand. You break our understanding of what is possible. Sarah met his gaze. War makes everyone do impossible things. The question is what we do when the war ends. Ambassador Martinez cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on the treaty negotiations. Commander Chen's experiences show us all why this war must end. But Sarah knew the truth. Her scars had already done more than any diplomat's words. The galaxy had seen the cost of fighting. Humanity. Not in ships lost or planets conquered, but in the price paid by those who fought. Every mark on her body was a promise that humans would never stop fighting for what they believed in. The legend of the Worldbreaker was no longer just stories whispered in dark corners. It was sitting at the peace table, offering to build something better than war. The peace talks had been going for 3 days. Progress was slow. Both sides wanted to end the war, but trust was hard to build after 7 years of fighting. Sarah spent her time between formal sessions talking with different alien delegations. Each conversation taught her something new about how the galaxy saw humanity. She sat in the station's observation lounge with sear flowing tide. The ancient Delphani looked out at the stars through the massive viewport. Her blue skin shimmered with patterns of deep thought. Your people are very strange, Commander, Flowing Tide said in her whisper-soft voice. We have watched many species make war. Most become predictable after time. But humans, you become more dangerous when you are losing. Sarah sipped her coffee and considered the words. How do you mean? The Battle of Titan's Gate, the Delphani replied. My people were observing from long range. The Zephyrian fleet had you surrounded. Your ships were outnumbered 5 to 1. Any other species would have surrendered or fled. Instead, you attacked. Sarah remembered Titan's Gate. It was her first major fleet command. 6 months after her promotion to admiral, the Zephyrians had laid a perfect trap. Sarah's task force was caught between Saturn's moons with no escape route. The battle plan had been insane. Instead of trying to break through the enemy line, Sarah ordered her ships to dive towards Saturn itself. The gas giant's gravity well would accelerate them to impossible speeds, but it would also make it nearly impossible to change course. Her captains thought she had gone crazy. Some refused the order until Sarah explained her reasoning. The Zephyrians expected humans to fight like every other species. They had positioned their fleet to counter conventional tactics. Sarah's ships screamed through Saturn's upper atmosphere at tremendous speed. The gravity slingshot effect hurled them directly at the center of the Zephyrian formation. The enemy had seconds to react before the human fleet tore through their lines like bullets. 7 Zephyrian dreadnoughts died in the first pass. The survivors were too shocked to organize a proper response. Sarah's ships used Saturn's moons for cover, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. The battle that should have ended the human fleet instead scattered the Zephyrian armada. "We still study that battle," Flowing Tide continued. "No other species would risk such a maneuver. The mathematics showed a 90% chance of your ships being destroyed by Saturn's gravity. Yet you succeeded." "Sometimes the only way out is through," Sarah said. She touched the scar on her collarbone, a reminder of the G-forces that had nearly killed her during the Saturn dive. Humans are good at choosing between bad options and worse options. Flowing Tide's skin patterns shifted to show confusion mixed with respect. "Your species treats certain death as merely another tactical challenge. How do you maintain morale when your plans require such sacrifice?" Sarah thought about her crews, the men and women who followed her into impossible battles. They knew the odds. They understood the costs, but they also believed in something worth fighting for. "We tell stories," Sarah said finally. "Every human knows stories about people who did impossible things. We grew up hearing about explorers who crossed dangerous oceans, or scientists who cured terrible diseases, or ordinary people who stood up to tyrants. The stories teach us that someone has to try, even when success seems impossible." Later that day, Sarah met with the Vorthon trade representative. The crystalline being's body chimed softly as they walked through the station's gardens. Vorthon communicated through harmonics as much as words. "The liberation of the Outer Rim was different," the Vorthon said. "Not one battle, but many small victories. A campaign of 3 months against impossible odds. How did you maintain momentum when your forces were so outnumbered?" Sarah paused beside a fountain. The sound of water reminded her of rain on distant worlds. The Outer Rim campaign had been her longest deployment. 3 months of hit-and-run attacks against entrenched Zephyrian positions. The enemy had controlled the Outer Rim for 2 years. They had built massive fortifications on a dozen worlds. Their supply lines were protected by patrol fleets. Any conventional assault would have been suicide. Sarah had broken her fleet into small groups. Each task force operated independently, striking supply convoys and isolated outposts. The Zephyrians could never predict where the next attack would come from, but the real victory had been won by logistics, not battles. Sarah's engineers had modified human ships to operate far from friendly ports. They scavenged supplies from enemy wrecks. They turned asteroids into hidden fuel depots. The Zephyrians had expected a short campaign. When the attacks continued for weeks, then months, their morale began to crack. Garrison troops on isolated worlds started seeing human ships in every sensor ghost. Supply convoys demanded larger escorts, which weakened other positions. "We made them afraid of empty space," Sarah told the Vorthon. "Every dark corner of the Outer Rim could hide human raiders. They had to defend everything, which meant they couldn't defend anything well." The Vorthon's crystalline body chimed thoughtfully. "You turned your weakness into their weakness. Fascinating. But the cost to your own forces must have been enormous." Sarah nodded. The scars on her legs were mostly from the outer rim, shrapnel from boarding actions, burns from reactor explosions, cuts from crawling through damaged ship hulls. 3 months of constant fighting had left marks on every survivor. War costs everyone, Sarah said. The question is whether you're paying for something worthwhile. That evening, Sarah was surprised to find Observer Kethri waiting outside her quarters. The young Zephyrian looked nervous but determined. "Commander, may I speak with you privately?" Kethri asked. Sarah gestured for the alien to enter her temporary quarters. The room was simple but comfortable. Kethri perched on the edge of a chair like they might need to run at any moment. "I wanted you to know what my people really think about the war," Kethri said. "The official reports speak of human military capabilities and strategic thinking. But the real fear is something else." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. Kethri was quiet for a long moment. "We have studied warfare for thousands of years. Every species follows patterns. Even when they innovate, the innovations follow logical progressions. But humans..." The young aliens shook their head. "You break the patterns. You make war itself unpredictable." Sarah poured herself another cup of coffee. "Give me an example." "The rescue of the Delphani refugee fleet," Kethri said immediately. "My people had trapped 2 million civilians in the asteroid maze. A perfect kill zone with no escape routes. We expected the Terran fleet to attempt a frontal assault. Instead, your ships appeared inside the maze itself." Sarah remembered that mission. The asteroid maze was exactly what it sounded like, a dense field of rocks that made navigation nearly impossible. The Zephyrians had driven the Delphani refugee ships into the center and were preparing to destroy them. The rescue had required precise timing and insane piloting. Sarah's ships had threaded through the asteroid field in single file, following a path calculated by her best navigators. One wrong move would have meant collision and death, but the real surprise had been the escape route. Instead of trying to fight their way out, Sarah had her engineers plant nuclear charges throughout the asteroid field. The explosions cleared a path wide enough for the refugee ships to escape. "You destroyed a natural maze that had existed for millions of years," Kethri said. "No other species would even consider such a solution. The environmental damage alone..." "Sometimes you have to break things to save lives," Sarah replied. "The asteroids were just rocks. The refugees were people." Kethri's silver eyes studied Sarah's face. "That is exactly what frightens us. Other species weigh costs carefully. They consider long-term consequences. But humans will sacrifice anything, even themselves, for what they believe is right." Sarah looked down at her scarred hands. Each mark represented a choice, a moment when she had decided that the mission was worth the pain, that other people's lives were worth the risk. "Is that such a bad thing?" she asked. "Not bad," Kethri said quietly, "but unpredictable. How do you make peace with a species that might sacrifice everything for any cause they believe in? How do you trust people who treat their own lives as expendable resources?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah realized this was the real heart of the peace negotiations. Not territory or resources or even military capabilities. The galaxy was afraid of human unpredictability. They didn't know how to negotiate with a species that might do anything. "You start by understanding what we actually believe in," Sarah said. "Yes, humans will sacrifice for our causes, but our causes aren't random. We believe in protecting innocent people. We believe in freedom and justice and the right to live without fear. If you share those beliefs, you have nothing to fear from us." Kethri nodded slowly. "That is what we hope to learn from these talks, whether humans can be partners instead of enemies." After the young Zephyrian left, Sarah stood at her window looking out at the stars. Tomorrow the talks would continue. Both sides would argue about details and protocols. But tonight, she had learned something important. The galaxy didn't fear human weapons or ships or technology. They feared human commitment, the willingness to pay any price for what was. High Admiral Veltar stood in the Zephyrian delegation's private meeting room. The chamber was decorated in the traditional style of his people, silver walls with flowing geometric patterns that shifted color based on the emotions of those present. Right now, the patterns showed deep concern mixed with resignation. Around the conference table sat the most important Zephyrian military minds: General Thexmore, master of siege warfare; Admiral Quindal, specialist in fleet tactics; strategic, analyst Voreth, whose mathematical models had predicted human behavior for 7 years of war, until recently, when the models had stopped working. "Show them the reports," Veltar said to his aide. The room's central display activated. Classification symbols marked every document as highest priority intelligence. Video feeds, battle analysis, reports, intercepted communications, 7 years of data about the human enemy. "The Terran anomaly," Voreth said, using their clinical term for Commander Chen. "We have more intelligence on this single human than on most enemy fleets. The data should allow perfect tactical prediction. Instead, it proves the opposite." The bow. First video showed Sarah at 16, working in the engine room of Kepler 442. Security footage captured her improvised weapon modifications in real time. Voreth highlighted the relevant sections. Standard doctrine suggests using civilian mining. Equipment would never occur to military mines. The power requirements alone should have made success impossible. Yet she succeeded on the first attempt. General Thexmore shifted uncomfortably. He had been commanding the Kepler 442 assault. What should have been a simple conquest became a humiliating retreat. The human child turned industrial tools into weapons more effective than our military hardware. My technical advisors still cannot explain how. "It gets worse," Voreth continued. "After capture, we subjected the human to standard interrogation. Neural disruptors that break the will of any sentient species. She not only resisted, but seemed to gain strength from the process." The next video showed Sarah during her captivity. Even at 16, strapped to an interrogation chair with neural disruptors firing into her brain, she stared at her captors with defiant eyes. The Zephyrian interrogators eventually stopped the session, unnerved by her complete lack of fear. "What disturbs me most," said Admiral Quindal, "is how she looked at us. Not hatred, not fear. She was studying us, learning our techniques while we tortured her." Veltar touched his own scars, thin silver lines across his cheek where human weapons had marked him at Titan's gate. "I faced her in battle 3 years later. She had learned from her captivity. Her tactics specifically countered our interrogation methods." The display showed the Battle of Titan's Gate from multiple angles. Zephyrian tactical analysis played over the footage. Computer models showed the human fleet's doom in precise mathematics. 5-to-1 odds. No escape routes. Perfect trap deployment. Then the human ships dove towards Saturn. "Suicide," General Thexmore muttered. "Any rational commander would have surrendered. The gravity forces alone should have killed her crews." Voreth manipulated the display to show Sarah's ship during the Saturn dive. Internal sensors captured the human bridge crew enduring forces that should have been fatal. Several officers lost consciousness. Sarah herself was bleeding from stress injuries, but she remained conscious and in command. Humans push their biology beyond safe limits, Voreth explained. "This one pushed further than any human we have on record. The G-forces should have stopped her heart. Instead, she used our own positioning against us," Veltar added. "We had deployed for conventional fleet action. When her ships emerged from Saturn's gravity well at impossible velocity, we had seconds to react. 7 dreadnoughts died before we understood what was happening." Admiral Quindal studied the tactical replay. The maneuver required split-second timing across multiple ships. One miscalculation would have scattered her fleet across Saturn's rings. How did she coordinate such precision while barely conscious? Human crews follow leaders they believe in. Voreth said. This is inconsistent with our understanding of command hierarchies. Rational species follow orders based on logic and authority. Humans follow leaders based on trust, loyalty. The concept defies analysis. The meeting continued for hours. Each battle revealed the same pattern. Human forces led by Sarah Chen performed beyond all rational expectations. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula, where she raised an ancient fleet from the dead. The liberation of the Outer Rim, where vastly outnumbered human forces systematically dismantled Zephyrian control. The siege of Firebase Omega, where one human held an entire army for 6 days. Look at the casualty reports, General Thexmore said grimly. Every engagement costs us 3 times the predicted losses, not because of superior human technology or numbers, because they fight like they have nothing to lose. But they do have something to lose, Admiral Quindal pointed out. The Chen human clearly cares deeply about her crews and civilians. Her tactical choices often prioritize their safety over strategic advantage. Voreth brought up psychological profiles. This creates an impossible contradiction. She values life intensely, but risks everything in combat. She shows mercy to captured enemies while destroying their fleets without hesitation. The mathematical models cannot resolve these conflicts. Because you're thinking like a Zephyrian, said a new voice from the chamber entrance. The military officers turned to see Observer Kethri entering the meeting room. The young intelligence operative looked exhausted, but determined. Kethri, Veltar acknowledged. Your report on the peace negotiations? The negotiations are proceeding as expected. But I have learned something important about human psychology from direct observation. Kethri moved to the central display and called up new files. Permission to present an alternative analysis? Veltar gestured consent. The room's walls shifted to attentive blue patterns. We have been analyzing human behavior through Zephyrian logic, Kethri began. Rational cost-benefit calculations, hierarchical command structures, individual survival prioritized over group goals. But humans operate on different principles. The display showed footage from various human colonies and ships, daily life aboard Terran vessels, crew interactions, cultural ceremonies. Social behaviors that Zephyrian analysts had previously ignored as irrelevant. Humans form emotional bonds that override individual survival instincts, Kethri explained. They will die for abstract concepts like honor or justice, because these concepts become more important than personal safety. The Chen human embodies this completely. General Thexmore scoffed. Emotional decision-making leads to defeat. Our victories against other species prove this. Do they? Kethri challenged. When did we last win a major engagement against Chen's forces? When did our predictions about human behavior prove accurate? Our rational approach has failed because we are fighting an irrational enemy. Admiral Quindal studied the cultural footage with new interest. You're suggesting their seeming irrationality is actually a different form of logic? Exactly. The Chen humans' scars tell the story. Each mark represents a choice to accept personal harm for the benefit of others. By our standards, this is insane. By human standards, this makes her a perfect leader. Voreth manipulated the display to show medical scans of Sarah's injuries over time. The cumulative damage should have forced her retirement years ago. Instead, her effectiveness increased with each injury. Because her crews see the scars as proof of her commitment, Kethri said. She has demonstrated repeatedly that she will share their risks. This creates loyalty that surpasses fear of death. Veltar moved closer to the display. As the commanding officer who had faced Sarah directly, he understood better than most. At Titan's Gate, when my flagship was crippled, her ships could have finished us easily. Instead, she provided medical aid to our wounded, which makes no tactical sense. General Thexmore protested. Wounded enemies can return to fight again. Unless she was sending a message, Admiral Quindal said slowly. demonstrating that humans can show mercy as well as destruction. Kethri nodded enthusiastically. The cultural files show this pattern repeatedly. Humans believe in something they call honor in victory. They distinguish between necessary killing and unnecessary cruelty. This is why the peace negotiations matter, Veltar realized. We cannot predict human behavior because we don't understand human values. But if we can find common ground, Voreth pulled up strategic projections. The war is becoming unsustainable. Our forces adapt to human tactics, then humans change their approach completely. Each adaptation cycle favors them more than us. Show them the latest reports, Veltar ordered. The display shifted to recent intelligence. Human shipbuilding capacity had increased despite battlefield losses. New colonies were being established in systems the Zephyrians thought too dangerous to inhabit. Human population growth remained steady even during wartime. They are not just surviving this war, Admiral Quindal observed. They are thriving despite it. Because war makes them stronger, Kethri said. Adversity forces innovation. Human technology advances faster during conflict than during peace. Their social bonds become tighter under pressure. General Thexmore studied the population data. Are you saying we cannot defeat them militarily? The peace treaty was 3 days from signing when the alarms began. Sarah was in her quarters reviewing the final details when the station's emergency lights started flashing. Her communication device buzzed with an urgent message from security. Chief Thokvar, Commander Chen, please report to the security center immediately. We have a situation. Sarah grabbed her diplomatic jacket and ran through the station corridors. Emergency protocols were in effect. Automated barriers sealed off sections, while security teams moved to defensive positions. The peaceful atmosphere of Nexus Prime had become tense and dangerous. The security center was chaos. Multiple displays showed ships approaching the station from different directions. Not the expected diplomatic vessels, but unmarked warships flying in attack formation. What's the situation? Sarah asked Thokvar. The old Korith's 4 eyes were focused on different screens simultaneously. Hardline factions from both sides. They don't want peace. 6 Zephyrian cruisers and 4 Terran destroyers approaching in coordination. Sarah studied the tactical display. The attacking ships had positioned themselves to prevent escape routes. Classic military doctrine for station assault. How long until they're in weapons range? 15 minutes, Thokvar replied. My security forces are not equipped for fleet engagement. We're a diplomatic station, not a fortress. Ambassador Martinez arrived with the rest of the Terran delegation. His face was pale with worry. Commander, we've received demands from the attacking ships. They want all peace negotiators turned over to them. They claim we're traitors to our respective species. Not happening, Sarah said firmly. She turned to Thokvar. What defenses does the station have? Minimal shields. Point defense lasers for asteroid debris. Emergency thrusters for station keeping. Nothing designed for combat. High Admiral Veltar entered the security center with his Zephyrian team. His silver eyes met Sarah's across the room. For a moment, 7 years of war hung between them. Then he stepped forward. Commander Chen, my ships are not responding to recall orders. I believe some of my officers have been compromised by extremist elements. Sarah nodded. Same here. The attacking Terran ships aren't following Coalition command protocols. Sir, interrupted Lieutenant Torres, the attacking fleets are demanding we choose sides. Fight for our own species or be branded as traitors. Sarah looked around the security center. Representatives from 50 different species watched her with growing fear. The peace talks had brought the galaxy's diplomatic elite to Nexus Prime. If the extremists succeeded, they would eliminate moderate voices from dozens of worlds. Can the station's emergency thrusters move us to safety? Sarah asked. Thokvar shook his head. Not fast enough. The attacking ships will reach weapons range before we can escape the gravity well. Sarah studied the tactical display again. The attacking fleets were using standard fleet engagement patterns. They expected either surrender or conventional defensive tactics. But Sarah had spent 7 years teaching enemies not to expect conventional responses from humans. "I need to speak with the other delegations," Sarah said. "All of them. Emergency assembly in the main conference room." 10 minutes later, Sarah stood before representatives of 50 species. Fear filled the room. These were diplomats and traitors. Not warriors. They had come to Nexus Prime expecting civilized negotiations, not a battle for survival. "The extremists want to stop the peace process," Sarah began. "They're willing to kill everyone here to do it. We have 2 choices. We can hide and hope someone rescues us, or we can fight back." The Delphani representative, Seer Flowing Tide, spoke first. "Commander, we are not warriors. How can civilians fight military vessels?" "By not fighting like warriors," Sarah replied. She activated the room's central display. "This station has capabilities the attackers don't know about. We're going to use their assumptions against them." She highlighted Nexus Prime's construction specs. The station was built around a massive industrial fabrication complex. Ships came here for repairs and modifications. The fabrication bays could build anything from fighter craft to heavy machinery. "The Vorthon linking technology," Sarah said, looking at the crystalline representative. "Can it connect the station systems to incoming ships?" The Vorthon delegate chimed thoughtfully. "Theoretically, yes, but the range would be very limited. Direct contact would be required." "What about the Threx hive mind communication?" "Sarah," continued, "could you coordinate multiple actions across the station simultaneously?" The insectoid Threx clicked nervously. "Our neural network could manage station systems in real time, but we have no military training." "You don't need military training," Sarah said. "You need to think like yourselves, not like soldiers." "Hi," Admiral Veltar stepped forward. "Commander, what exactly are you proposing?" Sarah smiled for the first time since the crisis began. "I'm proposing we remind those extremists why the galaxy calls me Worldbreaker." The next few minutes were controlled. Chaos. Sarah coordinated with species representatives while Thokvar's security teams prepared defensive positions. The plan was insane by any conventional standard, but conventional standards had never stopped Sarah before. The Vorthon and their crystal. Technology would link the station's systems to create a unified defense network. The Threx hive mind would coordinate timing across multiple simultaneous actions. The Delphani, with their deep understanding of stellar mechanics, would help calculate the precise gravitational effects needed. "Warning," came a broadcast from the attacking fleet. "Nexus Prime has 5 minutes to surrender all negotiators. Any resistance will be met with total destruction." Sarah stood in the station's main communications center. Around her, aliens from dozens of species worked frantically to implement her plan. Sworn enemies worked side by side. Former strangers trusted each other with their lives. "This is Commander Sarah Chen," she broadcast to the attacking fleets. "I'm speaking for all delegates aboard Nexus Prime. We refuse your demands." "Then you have chosen death, traitor," came the reply from the Terran extremist commander. "I've chosen to break another pattern," Sarah said. The attacking fleets opened fire. Plasma beams and missile swarms crossed space toward the station. Nexus. Prime's minimal shields flared and failed almost immediately. But Sarah's plan didn't rely on shields. At the moment of impact, the station's industrial fabrication systems activated. Instead of building ships, they built electromagnetic fields, massive industrial manipulators designed for moving asteroids. Suddenly grabbed the incoming projectiles and redirected them. The first wave of missiles struck empty space instead of the station. The second wave was caught by Vorthon linking beams and turned back toward their launchers. Plasma bolts that should have pierced the station's hull were dispersed by precisely timed industrial laser arrays. "Impossible," breathed the Zephyrian, extremist commander. "Stations cannot fight like ships." "This station can," Sarah replied. because it's not just a station anymore. The Threk's hive mind was coordinating defensive systems faster than any computer. The Vorthon Crystal Network was sharing power and information across the entire structure. The Delphani were calculating gravitational effects to slingshot debris at incoming ships. But Sarah's real surprise was yet to come. Nexus Prime's fabrication bays were still working. In the 10 minutes since the attack began, they had assembled, something no one expected. "Launch the escort drones," Sarah ordered. 50 small craft burst from the station's docking bays. They looked like maintenance pods because that's what they were, but each pod was now crewed by volunteers from different species. Diplomatic staff who had never flown combat missions were piloting improvised fighters. The extremist fleets found themselves surrounded by opponents they couldn't predict. How do you fight a maintenance pod flown by a crystalline being that can share sensory data with 50 other craft simultaneously? How do you target an enemy that treats three-dimensional space like a game? "Sir," reported a Terran extremist officer, "we're taking heavy casualties. These aren't standard defensive patterns." "Because they're not standard defenders," Sarah said, over the communication channel. "They're people fighting for something they believe in." The battle lasted another hour. Slowly, the extremist fleets broke apart under the coordinated assault. Some ships were destroyed by their own redirected weapons. Others were disabled by precisely targeted industrial tools. A few surrendered when their commanders realized the futility of fighting an entire space station turned into a weapon. When it was over, Sarah stood in the security center surrounded by alien diplomats who had become warriors for peace. Seer-flowing tides' skin patterns showed exhaustion mixed with pride. The Vorthon delegate's crystal body pulsed with harmonious satisfaction. Even the nervous Threx was clicking with what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of laughter. "Commander," High Admiral Veltar said quietly, "in 7 years of war, I never saw anything like this." "Because it wasn't war," Sarah replied. "It was defense. There's a difference." Security Chief Thokvar approached with a damage report. "Minimal casualties, mostly minor injuries from the G-forces during evasive maneuvers. The station's structure is intact." "And the peace talks?" asked Ambassador Martinez.